Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing discussion into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the day following the 4th of July. It is the 5th of July in the year 2017. It is a pleasure to be with you once again this week. This is our third day of broadcasting here live at the Virtual Center, and it makes me feel good to know that we've actually completed our week's responsibilities by being on the air over the last couple of weeks with technical problems and medical problems from my end and those kinds of things. We've had trouble getting fulfilling our regular schedule of programs, but it looks like this week we're going to make it. So I welcome all of you to the program today, and I thank you for your continued support of this program and of the Head On Radio Network. I think it's kind of exciting. Each day as I call in to go on the air, I never know whether we're going to get Bob or we're going to get Agnes. And it's kind of interesting because it doesn't really matter, and it's kind of neat getting a different one every couple of days. It's great. So anyway, if you call into our program today and would like to come on the air and comment on a few of the things we did yesterday, and I'm going to touch back on a couple of those things at the beginning of today's program, then you'll probably get Agnes as well because she's in the studio today, and she'll take your call and get you on the air real quick. So, if you'd like to do that, we sure would love to hear from you. Our phone number, if you do want to do that, our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-4676. If you are a little bit uncomfortable about going on the air, but at the same time you've got something you'd really like to say, then I hope that you'll feel comfortable trusting me to say it for you. If you send me an email and put down your thoughts in an email, first of all, I'll acknowledge receipt of your email and thank you for it. And if there's something I can contribute or react to it or comment on it, I'll make it. But when I put your email on the air, it's going to be the way you give it to me. It's not going to be edited. I'm not going to put any kind of a political spin on it at all. I will get on the air exactly what you want on the air. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And again, I do invite you to check on our Facebook page. For those of you who are regular users of Facebook, you know how easy it is. Just go to facebook.com and you're into the home page. And at the top there's a search box. And if you type in that box, the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you'll be into our Facebook page. And on that page, I've put a number of postings, many of them, most of them, links to articles that I've read in recent days that I think would be worthy of your time. And what I try to do on Facebook is not just put the link there, but write a paragraph or two and try to explain to you why I think that particular piece is something you might be interested in. It's usually linked to some of the things we've been doing or have done here at the Virtual Center. So, if I see something that's relevant to what we're doing anyway, I tend to flag it, because especially if it says something that we didn't cover or that none of us thought of mentioning or whatever, then I think it's something you should know, because if you are a follower of this program, then you've been privy to the discussion we had on that particular issue. So if I come across a link to an article that says a little bit something different on that issue, then I feel very, very comfortable alerting you to it. And then you can make your own decision if you have time and if you have the interest and would like to go on Facebook. Go to the link and read the complete piece. And then if you'd like to comment on things that I might have said about it, then by all means you can feel free to do that. So again, if you go to Facebook and at the search box, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you'll be into our Facebook page. And in fact, right away, the very first thing I'd like to mention on today's program is a little bit about our Facebook page. Yesterday, as I mentioned, I put a couple of postings on there yesterday about an hour and a half before we went on the air yesterday at 1:30 Eastern Time. On our Tuesday starting schedule, which is 30 minutes later than today or than it is on Mondays. And one of the postings, and we talked about it on the air yesterday, one of the postings, it seemed to me was a good one on it was on the fact that it was the 4th of July, and it was on an article by Danielle Allen. On the Declaration of Independence and on the 4th of July, I believe that was it. But the other posting is the one I really want to call your attention to. I mentioned that on Monday I had mentioned, in fact I promised, that I've been working on something for several days. And, I was getting bogged down a little bit, and I thought, well, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to post it on our Facebook page, give people the opportunity to see the kind of things I've been working on. And if they have perhaps a suggestion or a comment or can point out a way that they think I ought to go with it or whatever, then I would be more than receptive to that. So on Monday's program, I mentioned that I would be putting it on. So yesterday morning, about an hour and a half before we went on the air, I did post that. It was very lengthy because I wrote it originally in Microsoft Word, and I wrote it for regular publication. At least I thought it would be published. It includes a number of quotations, primary source excerpts of primary sources in a number of different areas. Jefferson quotes, Madison quotes, quite a few others. And it's getting very long. It's way beyond anything that I could submit for a publication because most of the publications I've been dealing with don't want it more than 2 pages. And I was well onto the 3rd page. So I know that I'm going to have to do a lot of editing and reducing it and streamlining it and condensing it and all that. I know that. But in order to fulfill my commitment to get it on Facebook, I put it on yesterday directly from the Word document. And then last evening, I started to get a couple of comments from friends, from people who had looked at the Facebook page. And one of them, who's a good friend, made a comment and said, I've got to be honest with you because it's lengthy. I skimmed it. But the point is that I realized from skimming it that there's so much in it that I want to go back and read it more carefully. And I thought, well, that was such sure nice of him, but he is a friend of mine. And I mean, one of the reasons he is a friend of mine because he's very, very kind. And so with that in mind, I said, well, I'm going to look and see how it came out on Facebook. Sometimes if you transfer something to Facebook, the structure, the organization gets a little bit changed. Well, what I knew but had forgotten was that punctuation is changed when you go on Facebook. And so if you have something that is a quotation in a printed form, or something that's in italics, or something that's underlined or bolded or anything else, when you put it on Facebook, you lose all of that. And so several of the excerpts from primary source material, several of the quotations that I had used, thinking that I would be presenting this in printed format, I didn't use quotation marks around it. I indented it. Because on a printed page, if it's indented and if it's in italics, which is what I usually do on things that I submit for publication, then it stands out clearly by its indentation and by the fact that it's italicized. It stands out as a quotation. So therefore, you don't put quotation marks around it because you don't need it. But if it's going to go on Facebook, you got to put quotation marks because everything else is eliminated. The indentation is eliminated. The italics are eliminated. The underlining is eliminated. One of the quotes, for example, that I had in the article originally, I had quoted a piece from, I can't remember which one it was, but I had quoted 3 or 4 lines from somebody, and I was particularly interested in one portion of it. One portion of the quote seemed to me to say exactly what I wanted to say. So I wanted to underline that in order to highlight it. But since it wasn't underlined in the original quote, I had to make the comment in parentheses at the end that I was the one that added the emphasis. So in parentheses at the end of the quote, I put emphasis added because I did that. It wasn't in the original. But then, of course, when I put it on Facebook, the underlining didn't show up. But the phrase in quotation marks, emphasis added, did. So I looked at it on Facebook and there was no emphasis at all, but there was a comment at the end that emphasis was added. That's just an example of a couple of things, and it was my fault because I knew from past experience that when you do transfer from Microsoft Word to Facebook, much of the punctuation and indentation and all of that disappears. And so if you're going to put it on Facebook, you got to prepare for it. You got to put quotation marks around the quotations, for example. If you're going to underline or put emphasis added, then you got to find a way to do it that Facebook will pick up. The result was that in looking at the way what I put on Facebook came out on Facebook, it really concerned me. Because not only is it long, I knew it was long, plus the fact, very honestly, it's pretty deep. I'm going to go into it a little bit today, probably in our second hour, some of it. And I think you'll get an idea that it's a little bit deep. It's a little bit abstract. So it's challenging. And people have got to wrestle with it a little bit. So I knew all of that going in. It was long, it was involved, and it was abstract. And it was, therefore, tough reading. But then when you combine that with the changes in punctuation and organization that actually putting it on Facebook created, where there were quotations, but there were no quotation marks around them. So therefore, it was impossible to tell what was my language and what was the quotation from somebody else. It became so confusing that I became very concerned about it, and I could understand my friend's comment. I skimmed it the first time, but there's quite a bit in it, I know, so I'm going to go back and reread it more carefully. So this morning, I sat down and I went back over the whole thing, and I made the changes, the appropriate changes, put quotation marks around all the quotations. So at least it's very clear what's mine and what I've taken from somebody else. And not only that, but I also had to recreate some of the paragraphs because Facebook tends to eliminate paragraph spacings and just puts them all as if it's all just one giant paragraph. And that becomes very, very difficult and hard to understand. So I went back and did all that. And the fact of the matter is I reposted it this morning. It's the same post that I put on there yesterday, but it has it just clears up some of the mystery and some of the confusion. So I want, if you are a regular visitor to our Facebook page, I want you to realize that I know that I've actually posted the same thing 2 consecutive days. But the one that's on there today, I think is a little bit easier to handle because at least it includes the organizational structure and some of the quotation marks that separate my language from somebody else's language. It also reestablishes the spacings between paragraphs. So in other words, it separates ideas one from another so that all the ideas don't just all come together in one, which makes it very, very confusing. So now that I probably totally confused you, I did want to say that because if you do go to our Facebook page, you're going to see this. It is a lengthy posting. And people have told me that you need to be very careful on Facebook, because if there's too much length on it, people who like to spend a lot of time on Facebook much prefer to skim Facebook than to sit down and read anything that's lengthy. I know that for myself because I do a lot of I read these links that I get. People send me a link to a particular article. I read it. And sometimes, if you read one article after the other, it becomes time consuming. And so therefore, a lot of people just won't take the time to read anything this long. But the fact of the matter is, in spite of that, I did it. And I put it on there. And one reason I put it on there is because some time ago here at the Virtual Center, it was well over a year ago, I got into this very same conversation, this very same discussion. And I mentioned that I was making a very, very concerted effort not to put anything on Facebook that was too long and too involved because it would discourage people from looking at it. Well, a couple of the regular people here who follow our program on a regular basis contacted me on that comment and said basically, please don't intentionally eliminate things because you feel that we can't handle it or won't take the time or whatever. Let us make that decision. If you think it's worthwhile, you put it there and I'll make a decision whether I think it's worthwhile enough to spend my time to look at it. But you don't want to get into the business of censoring your own material. One of our listeners told me that. I took that very, very seriously. And I concluded that the person who sent me that was right on target. And after that, I made up my mind that, this is a very, very challenging, interesting, exciting opportunity for me. And I hope it's an opportunity for some of the people that regularly follow us. And so consequently, basically what I think I'm learning how to do is teach on the internet. That's really what I feel like I'm doing. And I feel that I have a particular expertise and interest in materials that maybe a lot of people don't. I think they're very important materials, and I think they're very important to our nation and to the security and survival and growth of our nation, and the ability of our nation to sit up to its own mission, if you will. And consequently, since I feel that I do have something that I can contribute to that, I need to focus on contributing to it, not censoring material and saying this is too long, this is too complicated, this is too this is too that. I won't do that. And I appreciate the person who told me not to. So therefore, but I did have thoughts about this because this piece I posted is pretty long. And it's not complete. And I wrote that in the introduction to it. I've got more to add. I mean, I told the story right up to the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 19th century. Now what I need to deal with is, and you haven't read it yet, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm writing a kind of a history of science a little bit. It's basically on the theme of a history of science. And it takes us up into the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century. And what makes that significant in terms of what I'm writing about is that the Industrial Revolution is what prompts what we call today applied technology, applied science. And it's the Industrial Revolution and the challenges of the Industrial Revolution that cause scientists to begin to look for and to contribute or suggest very practical applications of science to everyday problems that the Industrial Revolution unearths and creates. If the Industrial Revolution is going to take advantage of the opportunities that industrialism presents, then it calls for scientific applications. And that's really the first time in Western history that science actually begins to be directly applied to man's problems. Up until this point in history, the application, the idea of pure science seemed to have no practical applications. As one person made a comment, I think in the beginning of maybe in the 18th century or the beginning of the 19th century, made a comment and said, no government is going to support science and pay for somebody to weigh air or something like that that doesn't seem to have a direct payoff. So for a long time, there was in people's minds the idea that science didn't have anything practical to contribute. It was theoretical. It was abstract. It was a world separate from and unto itself. Technology, on the other hand, was something different. Technology traditionally was what we think of today in the word tinkering. Technology was the property of engineers, of people with the kind of application inclination, if you will, that these were the tinkers. You didn't need any special training or degree or anything like that. But most of the technology that was created throughout man's history, doing what needed to be done faster, cheaper, more efficiently, with better results or whatever, tended to be the result of people who worked in the field and knew the field well enough to know not only the problems but potential solutions to the problems. So there was this gap between pure science and technology that existed for a long time. The Industrial Revolution brings the two together like nothing ever before in history, because the Industrial Revolution literally redirects the world and redirects the way people live and earn their living and spend their days in this world. It creates all sorts of potential, but at the same time, it presents all sorts of problems. And it's at that point that science really becomes applied, where people begin to see that many of the things that scientists are playing with and experimenting with and observing in laboratories might actually become applicable to real life issues that people in their day-to-day lives could benefit from. And once that link is made, then people realize what the full potential of the Industrial Revolution might ultimately be. And what you're doing is taking some of the most creative minds that have been, for all practical purposes, focused or stuck in the laboratory, as you will, and you're taking these minds out of the laboratory and putting them to work on the problems of people's day-to-day lives. And the potential becomes incredible. So by the time you get into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people are beginning to imagine incredible possibilities as a result of what science, what man understands about his universe, understands about the laws of nature, the laws of motion, the principles that guide science, that guide physics, that guide chemistry, that guide astronomy, all of these things. And it's at that point, it seems to me, that the full impact of the Industrial Revolution, it's at that point that the Industrial Revolution legitimizes the term revolution, because it's the application of science that makes all these changes possible. And of course, there are a number of other changes that happen with it. One of them is the emergence of big government. Big government begins to sponsor. Big government becomes the patron, if you will, of scientific research, because it's government's job to address and solve these problems for their citizens. So government has a vested interest in science being successful. So through grants and those kinds of things, government becomes a major sponsor of scientific research. And once that happens, we have to deal with the realities of applied science, which is that government is only going to fund research that promises a payoff, that promises practical benefits. And so what that does is skew the nature of science. It causes scientists to think in applied ways, in worldly ways. It discourages the abstract kind of thinking associated with pure science, and instead turns scientists into high-powered technologists, or engineers, if you will. But the fact of the matter is the cost of science becomes increasingly impressive and imposing. It takes government to fund science because funding some of these things becomes so expensive. So somebody needs to help the scientists because there's no way they can support their own labs and their own research and the travel and the collecting of specimens and all of these other things. So consequently, what we end up with is a concurrence of a number of different issues driven by the practical needs created by the Industrial Revolution, or the practical opportunities, if you will, created by the Industrial Revolution. And it's into this mix that we have the introduction of the modern university, the modern research university. We begin to train scientists. We begin to professionalize the field. We begin to create a curriculum that is specifically designed to train physicists and chemists and archaeologists and astronomers and doctors. And universities begin to house these professions and to control this training. It's all tied up with what Thomas Kuhn calls normal science. And normal science, to a large degree, becomes applied, becomes much more practical and much less abstract. When you get that, and you combine it with the contributions in the late 19th century of Charles Darwin and his ideas of evolution, what Charles Darwin does is introduce the idea of change back into nature. Whereas Newton and the medieval worldview and the classical worldview suggested that the universe was a very complicated, complex mechanism created by some divine mind, and it was functioned according to particular laws. The result was that many people believed that Newton had proved that the universe was fixed, was stable, didn't change. What Darwin contributes is the direct opposite of that. Through his research with evolution, Darwin introduces the idea that change is always happening. It's perpetual. It never stops. And that change affects all aspects of life. So now what you've got is applied science combined with the reality of science that change is constantly underway in the universe. And then in the early 20th century, we have the introduction of Albert Einstein. And Einstein further complicates the formula, if you will, by suggesting that there's no such thing as matter. That what we always assume to be matter really constitutes different forms of energy. and that there's constant motion and constant energy in the universe. Things are in constant motion. And part of this is the idea of relativity. Things change, perspective changes. The thing being observed is not all that matters. The observer becomes a factor in what is observed. And we're all the way back to the early Greeks of the 6th century. We are all the way back to what Hindus and Buddhists and Taoists in the East have been saying about life throughout. That there really is no separation between the material world and the spiritual world. That it's all part of the same thing. That we're all connected. That we're all interrelated. That a world which we see as division, as dissected, as in pieces, a world which our science has taught us needs to be addressed in pieces and segments in order to be understood, can only be understood when those pieces are reassembled and we begin to look for the totality or the unity that defines life. This is what that posting on Facebook, in a nutshell, is about. It's involved, it's confusing, but it's important, I think, because it affects everything we do. It affects the way we interact with each other. It affects how we look at other people. It affects how we deal with other people. It affects how we deal with people who are different than we are, speak different languages, worship a different God, whose skin is a different color, whose nationality is different. What we're finding in science in the 20th and 21st centuries as a result of the contributions principally of Einstein is that we begin to look, we need to begin to look for the way things relate, the way things interact, the way things connect. And that literally is a 180-degree shift from the way we have traditionally addressed problem solving. If you think back to the scientific method that we all learned in school, you collect evidence, you study the evidence, you break it down into its component parts, you study each of the parts, and that way you begin to understand the reality of the whole. But the fact of the matter is, if you focus on the parts and you never take the time to reassemble the parts back into the whole that those parts make up, then you really are missing the point. You are spending your life focusing on trees and never seeing the forest. You are spending your time focusing on those things that divide people, and you are never giving life the credit it deserves, because all of us are part of a bigger whole. All of us are related. There are more things that make us alike than there are things that divide us. But the way we approach life and the way we've been taught to approach life causes us to look at the divisions and the separations, the competitive nature, rather than the cooperative nature of people learning to live together in peace, harmony, respect, and affection. What we're talking about is a total revelation in the way people look at life, look at the world, and look at other people. I would suggest to you, if one accepts the idea that there is a creator, and I'm pretty close to Thomas Jefferson on this, then one has to believe that that creator gave man the ability to reason and think for a purpose. and I'll use the word that everybody is familiar with, God. And I will say that it's important to realize that it only makes sense, to me at least, that the reason we have a mind and the reason we have the ability to think, to reason, to deduce, to figure things out, to weigh alternatives, to evaluate evidence, to collect data, to understand data, to reassemble data into its bigger meaning. The reason we have those abilities is because they were given to us by our God. And like Jefferson, I believe that if God gave us those, it was because he wanted us to use them. And I think that the changes that we're beginning to see in the world of science, in the way we look at the universe, are beginning to suggest that God's ultimate purpose is on its way to being fulfilled. That man is beginning to recognize that life is really not about what separates people, but what unites people. We just have got an awful lot of catching up to do, I believe. That's why I think this particular issue that I've posted, which I know is confusing, is so important, because I think it raises the kinds of questions and the kinds of issues that all of us need to begin to be thinking about. I think it's the future. It's not the future for us. It's going to happen. It's not going to happen fast enough for it to come in our lifetimes. I realize that. But I also believe that ultimately this is where we're heading, and we're finally getting there. We fought wars driven by religion and race and gender and nationality and ideology. We fought wars based on what people think is the best form of life that people ought to be living. We have conducted or been involved in revolutions which were caused in large part by people's desire to be free and make decisions over their own lives for themselves. There are so many complications, so much potential in this kind of thinking. I thought it was worthy. And I don't mean that I've got the answers, but I think I've raised at least some of the questions. And I believe by putting them on Facebook, it gave me an opportunity to share some of those ideas with somebody else. That is an overview of the posting on our Facebook page. I'd like to, in fact, I said that I was going to be getting into it in our second hour, and here we are almost through the first, and I've already covered a lot of it. But I think what I'm probably going to do is just let it go at this point and give people an opportunity to look at it and react to it. And then maybe we can revisit this particular topic next week. And in the interim, I'm going to try to work out this conclusion, because this complex story of Darwin and the Industrial Revolution and science and the rise of the universities and the idea of professionalism in science and the idea of degrees, the structure of normal science, the idea that science that is applied basically suggests that there's practical science and there's impractical science. There's good science and there's fake science. And we have a president who's basically running with that ball, has picked up that ball and is running with it. So I think all of these things pertain to the way the founders looked at the world, the way the Constitution is constructed. All of these things revolve around consideration of these kinds of questions. I really think that this is what the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility is all about. I think in a political system like ours, it seems to me, civic responsibility plays such a key part. It can only work. It can only fulfill its own potential when citizens contribute in ways that the system is designed for citizens to participate. And in order to do that, we are looking at a special kind of education, and we're looking at what has happened to that particular approach to education as people with agendas have taken control of it and diverted it into directions which may or may not lead to positive ends. So again, I've got to tell you that this is really what the posting on the Facebook page is all about. I don't think it answers many questions, but I think it raises a few. I hope it does. Where my life is at and where I am professionally and intellectually and everything else, I've pretty well concluded that the major issue is raising the questions, not answering them. We spend our whole lives memorizing the answers to questions that other people have given us. But the questions that matter most, we've tended to push to the side and not address them because they're too controversial, because they're too dangerous, because we don't believe our young people ought to be challenged with anything that difficult or that complex, that we have to treat our children with kid gloves. They can't handle the kinds of complexities and abstract thinking that we're talking about. So ultimately what we've done is we've reduced our whole approach to education to a degree where we thought that we were doing the best for our young people. And in effect, what we ended up doing was boring them and giving them a very jaundiced, very negative look or attitude toward learning, towards reading, towards thinking, towards cooperating with other people. We got to turn that around, and we got to change it. And I think science is indicating that this change is indeed in order. It's been a long time coming, but it's beginning. I will look forward to hearing your reactions to some of these things once you get a chance to wrestle with them. And I thank you for putting up with me for the first 40 some odd minutes of our program today. When we began our program, my plan was to touch a little bit on a few things that we had touched upon yesterday, and then get into a few areas that are getting a lot of attention nationally and internationally today, associated obviously with the behavior of government and the things that are going on in the world. And then I thought that the next item, pending the amount of time we might have left in our second hour, I would address this posting on Facebook. Turned out, the best laid plans, once I got started on that Facebook posting, I went off. And I spent the first 45 minutes of our program today on that particular posting. But I think I accomplished a goal that I had for today. So with that, and again, we do have a phone number, 304-663-4676. If you would like to sound off on this, or you would like to just call up to tell me that I must have put something very strange on my Wheaties this morning, whatever your reaction is, I would enjoy hearing from you. I mean it. So if you are so inclined to do that, then by all means do it. We will be taking a break in about 15 minutes at the top of the hour, close to it. And we'll take a 5-minute break, and that's a pretty good time to make a call and get online so that we can begin our second hour, all of us reacting to some of the things you think and you have to say. So with that, I'd like to, in the next 15 minutes before we reach the end of our first hour, I'd like to revisit a little bit of what we touched upon yesterday. Yesterday, of course, was the 4th of July. And we spent quite a bit of our time together yesterday talking about some really high-powered articles that were written in some of our major publications in celebration of the 4th of July, celebration of Independence Day. One of the things we addressed was the Danielle Allen article that I mentioned at the very beginning of today's program. Another issue that we mentioned was an article in yesterday's Washington Post on Thomas Jefferson's final letter, which we pointed out, or the author pointed out, really was not the final letter, that he ended up writing 2 more, and that the real final letter was a wine list, which I think kind of meant that Jefferson went out in style. But anyway, we talked about this last letter and what he really thought Independence Day and the celebration of it was all about. And like many of you, I watched on television last evening the Capitol 4th, the celebration from Washington, D.C., with the fireworks, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the music. I think it's infectious. It makes you feel good. And I know I count myself among hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who agree with me. That's one of the highlights of our 4th of July in the last several years, is people's opportunity to tune in and catch that celebration. Some people caught it in Boston with the Boston Pops, and I, of course, grew up there, and I used to attend that as a youngster. Didn't appreciate it at the time, but I sure as heck do now. Most of the time that we spent yesterday around the issue of Independence Day was focused on an article that appeared in the New York Times yesterday, and the focus of the article was Jefferson's idea on religious freedom. Jefferson's idea on keeping government out of people's religious lives, if you will. The article was written by 2 historians, prominent historians of the founding period, one at Harvard, the other at the University of Virginia. And we talked an awful lot in yesterday's program about Jefferson's approach to the idea of religion and to the relationship or limits on the relationship between politics and religion, between government and religion. And the authors of this article made the point that Jefferson believed that the only way we could live up to the promise of the founding, the promise of the Declaration, if you will, is to protect people's religion from government by keeping government out of it and acknowledging and recognizing that one's religious beliefs were one's own business. And Jefferson was very consistent throughout his life, making the point when confronted with the infamous question about his religious beliefs. His religious beliefs were his own business. And because he took that position, many of his critics chose to believe and accuse him of being an atheist, of not being a Christian, not being a good Christian, being anti-religion. And that was the issue that I wanted to spend our time on yesterday, because it seemed to me that some of the things we looked at that Jefferson actually said and believed about religion suggests that Jefferson was a long way from being an atheist. His effort to revise Scripture, revise the New Testament in such a way that he was able to capture and retain the ideas of Jesus that contributed to man's ability to live together in peace, harmony, and love. He felt the need to separate those from the ideas of miracles, from the mystic part of religion. The idea of miracles, the idea of immaculate conception, the idea of being resurrected and coming back to life. The kinds of things that many of our organized religions focus upon. These, Jefferson believed, were very personal and needed to be kept that way. And the implication, of course, is that much of the world's problems and the hostilities of man against man that the world has witnessed in the name of religion over the centuries has been based on man's desire to impose his views of his God and his religion on other people. And Jefferson, along with Madison, was very, very adamant in protecting people's right to investigate God and religion and religious truth for themselves. That's why Jefferson believed man had a mind. That's why God gave man a mind. And that was the advice that he gave his nephew, Peter Carr. We talked about that yesterday. One additional point that I wanted to make today about that discussion that I don't think came up, and it really should. And this focuses directly on Jefferson himself. Whether in fact Jefferson's priorities are related to religion or related to governing society. In other words, is Jefferson's priority goal, objective, to keep government out of people's religious affairs in order to protect people's freedom to study and believe in religion what people chose to do for themselves? Is his priority the protection of religion and his realization that the only way to do that is to keep government out? Or is Jefferson's principal priority the need to govern society and the need to, in order to do it, the need to encourage people to pursue religious questions for themselves and keep those questions out of the public arena? Were Jefferson's principal objectives civic, or were they religious? Was his priority concern religion, or was his priority concern preserving community, preserving a society that could be governed, rather than a society that was so divided over religion that people and groups wanted to kill each other in the name of God? I think this is a real debate there. I think you could argue both. If I were in a college class on this particular issue, then that would be a question that I would ask students to wrestle with on an exam. Namely, after you read Jefferson, after you reflect and discuss Jefferson's ideas on religious freedom and the role of government in its responsibility to protect people's religious freedom, is his priority concern governing, or is his priority concern preserving religion from political interference? I would suggest you could make the argument both ways. Myself, I think I lean toward the idea of what Jefferson called, in his letter to his nephew, civic religion or civil religion. Those things that everybody can agree on, those things which enable people to remain connected, to remain united, rather than those things that divide people. I think this very honestly takes us back to the issue that I was dealing with at the beginning of the program today, which is our inclination to focus on the things that divide more than the things that unite. It's very obvious that Jefferson's views on politics and religion and his contributions to those, writing of the Declaration, his role in politics both in Virginia and on the national level, 2 terms as President of the United States, his contributions to the creation of the University of Virginia. It's very obvious to me that Jefferson has very, very clear, profound, deep ideas on what is necessary for the full potential of independence in this country to be realized. And I think he recognizes that all of the potential that exists could disappear over differences caused by things like religion, very personal things that have ceased to become personal and become tainted with political efforts to impose your thinking on other people, and thereby denying them the opportunity to pursue their own religious truth for themselves. I'm hearkening back to the idea, if you remember, we spent a day, part of a program on this issue some time ago, and it was Rousseau's idea of civic religion. The idea that in a modern, complicated, complex society, it becomes necessary to focus on those things which unite people. And therefore, all modern governments openly or inadvertently find themselves developing the ingredients of what Rousseau called civic religion. A religion built around the common things, the flags, the national anthem, the symbols, all of the things that people can unite to. The Capitol Fourth program from the nation's capital on the 4th of July that's on television for millions to see. The music, the parades, the fireworks, the songs, the patriotism, the joy, the happiness, the exuberance that people in that audience expressed as they waved little flags in their hand and swayed with the music of groups like the Beach Boys and the Four Tops, and I saw all of that last evening. I think that's really where Jefferson's mind was. And I don't think it's a bad place to be very honest with you. That's the one issue we didn't deal with as to whether Jefferson's priorities are religious or civic. Whether his concern is governing society in ways that work, or whether his priorities is preserving religion and religious freedom from political interference. I really think it's a major question. I think it's one, my reading of Jefferson seems to lead me in a particular direction. Yours might take you in another direction. I think you could argue for each. Again, if this was a college class, that would be a final exam essay for me, is to ask students to draw on the sources, wrestle with these issues, and argue for the point of view that made the most sense to them. We've just about reached the top of our first hour. It looks to be right on the mark at the top of the hour. So I think it's a great time to pause and take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, I want to touch on an issue that I think is really important. It goes back a little bit to the idea of artificial intelligence we were talking about yesterday. But more important, it focuses on example, a real-life example of the implications, positive and negative both, of artificial intelligence in our everyday lives. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We've gone through our first hour on this Wednesday, the 5th day of July. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for our second hour. I hope you'll stay with us. Thank you. Thank you, Bob, and welcome to the second hour of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. On this Wednesday, it is the 5th day of July in the year 2017. If you are just joining us, welcome. If you were with us through the first hour, on this day, I particularly thank you for staying with us because some of the things that I got into in the first hour are a little bit iffy. But I was basically trying to explain as an overview a posting that I put on Facebook this morning on our Facebook page. And I want to alert you, if you weren't with us in our first hour, that it's involved and it's long. And I tried to explain why I think it's significant. I don't know if I was successful or not, but I convinced myself that it was worthwhile posting it. So that maybe that's all I need to worry about anyway. Thank you so much for your continued support of this program and for your continued support of the Head On Radio Network. I think we have a treat today. We opened the program with Agnes, and in our break we got Bob. So that means that they're both there. And so if you'd like to call in and sound off on any of these issues, the issue of the Facebook posting, which is about the first 45 minutes of our first hour, and then the issue of Jefferson and religion in the last 15 minutes, then I hope that you'll feel comfortable doing it. All you need to do is pick up the phone and dial area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-4676. If you'd like to communicate with me in an email, I would love to hear from you, and I will acknowledge receipt of your email. And if there's something you'd like to get on the air, but you're a little bit uncomfortable to go on the air yourself and you trust me to do it in an email, then by all means, please feel comfortable to send it to me, and I'll do the very best I can to represent your interests. What I present on the air will be what you give me. It'll not be what I think about what you give me. And so if I do that, I will do that separately. But I think the most important thing is not to skew what you say, but to get what you say on the air, and I'll do my very best to do that and to honor your intent when you took the time to send an email. I do also encourage you to take a look at our Facebook page. We spent the bulk of our first hour talking about a posting that is on that page as of this morning. Why the fact that it's on there again this morning after it was on there yesterday, I had to clean it up a little bit for reasons that I explained in our first hour. But I do hope that you'll take the time. I'd like to return to that topic. In fact, I intended going on the air today that much of our second hour would be focused on that posting, on the ingredients of that posting. But now that I've addressed it and tried to give you an overview of it, I think the most sensible thing to do is give you the opportunity to look at it, postpone discussion of it until next week. And thereby you would have had the opportunity to look at it. In the meantime, I'll have the opportunity maybe to come up with a way to end it and pull it all together in some sort of a way of conclusion that makes some sense and at the same time speaks to the overall significance of the issue. That's my challenge. and I'll be working on that this weekend, among other things as well. Also, I remind you, forgot to at the beginning of our program, that we do have a backup stream. So if anything does happen in our hour to get this second hour today to the stream, then what I encourage you to do is go back to your search engine, whether it's Explorer or Chrome or whatever you use, and type in on your search engine Head On Live, headon.live, Live, and you'll pick up a backup stream that will get us back on air for you. So I just wanted to mention that because I know that there has been in recent weeks some question about the stream. Bob made the comment in one day that the stream for the White Rose Society was having some real issues, and it was affecting programming. And I've had a couple of people make comments to me about it as well, that the last 15 minutes of the program didn't come across or whatever it might be. So I just wanted to alert you to that alternative stream, which is headon.live, Live. Hey,
Bill.
Yes, Bob.
Just by way of an update on that.
Okay.
I can happily report that most all of the streaming issues seem to now be resolved. However, we do continue to stream both at White Rose Society and at headon.live.
Right. That's great. Well, Bob, thank you. It makes it so much easier to get into your program at night as well for people that are new.
Right. And if anybody's listening to your program that doesn't listen to mine, they need to also know that, well, I'm not entirely certain, but I think TuneIn, the TuneIn app, and Stitcher may also be alternative possibilities.
Okay.
And we're going to add some new functionality. Of course, I'm going to start uploading your program to my Podbean account, and so people can find it that way. Podbean.com. Just look for Bob Kincaid. It's not there now, but it will start. That's coming. Also probably adding. It's a matter of cost and figuring things out along those lines. Probably adding SoundCloud as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's if you can't get this program, it won't be for want of trying.
Right. It won't be because of the lack of alternatives.
Right.
That's
exactly.
Great, Bob. That is wonderful. Thank you.
Before we jump on, and I know you've got stuff to do, but you mentioned Jefferson. And
right.
I've spent a portion of the last two nights discussing Jefferson. And I don't want to be just Bob the bum out. But the longer I study him, the less impressed I become, Bill.
Okay.
There's no getting around his genius. But there is so much undeniable rank hypocrisy mixed in amongst the genius that you begin. I don't know. Let's say it's like mixing. Mixing lead shot and rice.
I got you.
You get to the point where you're not sure if you're sorting rice from lead shot or lead shot from rice.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Bob, I know what you mean, and I find that many Jefferson scholars, and I'm thinking specifically of the one that co-authored the article yesterday that we focused on. Her last name is Reed. I've lost the article, but she's a history professor at Harvard. And she won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 with her book on Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And she points out that there's absolutely no question in her mind. I think this addresses the issue that you're raising, Bob. She makes the point that there's absolutely no question when you really focus on Jefferson that there is an awful lot in him where he doesn't seem to be living up to the philosophies that he talks about in print.
Well, without a doubt, and one of the jumping off points that I had was an article that I found about the opening of the new of some new exhibits at Monticello, and I'd very much like to see them. I didn't realize, and it hadn't been publicized much, that he built Sally Hemings her own little cabin, and he built it right next to his bedroom.
I didn't know that.
In 1941, with the increasing number of visitors to Monticello, that structure, which was known about, was converted into a men's bathroom, which, if you're at all interested in irony, seems a real slap in the face to Ms. Hemings.
It certainly does. It certainly does. I did not know that, Bob.
So now they're trying to right some wrongs, and I'm sure that the conservatives out there would say that that it's an attempt to smear Jefferson. But what it is, according to the Monticello folks, is an attempt to bring the real Jefferson to light. And there were many aspects of Thomas Jefferson in which he was not a nice man.
Oh, yeah.
I find a certain irony in the fact that this is a little, look, it just is what it is. I'll just say it.
Yeah. Okay.
He did things to Sally Hemings that we deplore Donald Trump for doing to women.
Right.
He could grab Sally Hemings the way Donald Trump says that he likes to grab women. And it was perfectly okay. All right? Here's a parallel. It is said that the more and more divorced from reality Donald Trump shambles around the White House in a bathrobe and slippers. You've seen that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I have.
Well, guess who else shambled around the White House in a bathrobe and slippers? Thomas Jefferson. I mean, that's in the historical record. And just a little bit of the deconstruction that I went into last night, and I was talking about this stuff, and I was like, gosh, I wish Dr. Bill was listening. I'd love to hear from Dr. Bill on this, because you know so much more about this than I do.
Oh, I don't. Some of the things you're talking about, I don't, Bob. I focus mostly on the writing, and I tend to focus much more on the ideas and the philosophy and the ideologies and all of that. And I admire his ability to grasp and to articulate positions on these issues. But at the same time, I am confronted with the realities of what I know. That in spite of all the things he was writing about rights and people's humanity and all the rest of it, he owned Sally Hemings, and he continued to own her all the way through. And, and he was not kind to his slaves. He was not among the kindest slave owners even in his own day. And somehow I think we have to deal with that. I'm also aware of the other side, that it's not fair to judge somebody in a different era by the along the values,
by the standards of our own
today.
Yeah,
right.
I get that entirely, but I think if we hew entirely to that side, then we lose the ability to ever make any sort of historical judgment about anybody's behavior.
Right. Well, I think I'll be honest with you. I think one of the issues here, Bob, and this, I'm just thinking out loud now because of the conversation that I'm having with you. A lot of this, I think, goes back to the fact that we tend to read into Jefferson an awful lot of things that aren't there. I'm thinking specifically of the impact of Lincoln on Jefferson's reputation and the things that Jefferson wrote. We tend to assume that Jefferson was laying out things for us, for people, that he didn't live up to himself. He admits when he writes the Declaration of Independence, for example, that he wasn't trying to write anything new. He wasn't trying to tell anybody. He was trying to basically say in the shortest possible way what he believed thinking people throughout the world believed. And he wasn't trying to introduce new things or encourage people to go in new directions. He wasn't telling people how to live their lives. He thought he was introducing the Declaration with a statement as to what people believed around the world. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think we have a tendency to become victim of that ourselves. We tend to assume that he was laying out behavior for people that he didn't want to or couldn't live up to himself.
And
I don't know how accurate that is.
Laid out in sterile form, isolated from its time and its circumstances, there's no getting around the fact that those opening two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence are among some of the most beautiful words ever written in the English language, and inspiring.
Right.
But when you get into the body of it, and the one that just leapt off the page at me, and I come back to it year after year, is that line about the murderous Indian savages.
Right. Right.
That the king has caused to attack the poor, put upon, absolutely innocent little colonists.
Settlers, yes.
Yeah. When in fact it was an agreement between the crown and the native peoples that said the colonies would push no further into their lands.
Right.
And it was the settlers who thumbed their nose at George III. I made a mistake last night by giving him a German accent, by the way. He was the first of the Hanovers who actually spoke English as his first language. I didn't realize that. But so he actually turned that 180 degrees to try to make the colonists the victims when they were actually the aggressors.
Right.
But what I found most particularly hypocritical is the fact that we know in 1776 when he wrote this, we know he knew about the 1774 Battle of what we call Point Pleasant or Two-Endie Way.
Right.
And we also know that he knew about the precursors to what became Lord Dunmore's War. And those precursors involved the wholesale slaughter, because remember in that paragraph about the murderous Indian savages, he says that it's the murderous Indian savages whose known method of warfare is the indiscriminate killing of men, women, and children. Well, in point of fact, it was good, white, God-fearing, Christian colonists who engaged in the indiscriminate slaughter of men, women, and children. And in fact, and the way this all comes out, in what is known as Logan's Lament, and I'm sure you're familiar with Logan's Lament, are you not?
You know, Bob, I'm familiar with the term, but I'm having a difficult time putting meaning to it.
Chief Logan, for whom Logan County is named, was so pro-white that he caught hell from his own people for his collaboration until white folks came and slaughtered all of his kinfolk. And by the time he does Logan's Lament in Ohio, as he notes in it, there is not one drop of blood runs in the veins of not one drop of Logan's blood runs in the veins of any human being. They slaughtered everybody related to him: his wives, his children, his grandchildren.
Bob, I understand.
And then
what you're saying.
And then just to put a bow on it, in 1782, and I know you're familiar with this, Jefferson publishes Notes on the State of Virginia.
Right.
Well, in 1782, in Notes on the State of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson praises Logan's remarks up one wall and down the other. for the magnificence of his rhetoric and its stirring qualities. I'm not sure exactly the words he used. It's been a while
Right.
since I read it. But he makes no bones about his admiration for the rhetorical abilities of Chief Logan.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And yet, 2 years after Logan said what he said, there's Jefferson sitting in Philadelphia, scratching out outright untruths about the murderous Indian savages.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question is, if he was trying to present the world as other people understood it, is there any way within the framing of the Declaration to know, okay, this part's Jefferson, but that part's Franklin, and that part's Adams?
No, I don't know that there is. I really don't know that there is, Bob. The way they divided up they gave the job to Jefferson to write the document. But there's no question that Adams especially made a number of recommendations for change. And what he was trying to do was make changes that he knew Congress would insist on making. In other words, he was reflecting what he believed to be the priorities of the Congress. Before they went to the entire Congress and let Congress begin to suggest changes, Adams made the few that, the major ones that he thought they would surely jump on. So, there's quite a bit of detail on that. There's also an awful lot of examples where Franklin is cautioning Adams to back off and not be as harsh on Jefferson as Adams could be. I mean, Adams was absolutely uncouth in his insensitivity.
John Adams was not a nice guy to hang around with.
No, he was an ass. And I think Franklin knew it and recognized it. I mean, Franklin was so angry at Adams for going over there to join the ambassadorial group in Great Britain and pissing off everybody, And he
did it, and he did that to piss off people. There was no misunderstanding. Adams knew what he was doing, and he meant to do what he did.
Yeah, he was. He not only didn't know how to treat other people, he really didn't care how he treated other people. He really did believe that he felt that he was superior to other people, and that the best thing that people could do would be to learn from him and take his cues. And basically that's what he was. The way he raised John Quincy to be president, it's unbelievable. I mean, the advice he gave Abigail on raising John Quincy and what it meant, what you had to do in order to raise a president that was worthy of the office. And it's unbelievable. I mean, with John Quincy, it was interesting. They created somebody that a lot of people couldn't stand, and it was only the quality of John Quincy himself that he was able to overcome a lot of this. And after he left the White House and went back into Congress and took up positions against slavery, did what I think the best part of John Quincy come out. So yeah, I think there's a lot of this. I don't know if there's a way to distinguish, which is Adams and which is Franklin and which is Jefferson.
And I guess the bottom line to all of this, Bill, if you don't mind me just,
that's okay. Go right ahead.
Hijacking half of the last hour of
the
program.
Listen, that's fine. You're doing great. I think it's important. I can't do this. I'm glad you are.
There's, this sort of ties together. You mentioned Jefferson talking about a civic religion. Well, Madison talked about that too.
Mm-hmm.
That it was a means whereby sectarianism could be quelled in a mutual love of this magnificent experiment in self-government in which we were engaged.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lovely idea. It hasn't worked, regrettably. But it seems like there's no middle ground, Bill. We either wholly mythologize these people and some manifestation of a national grace, absolve them of all their human flaws, or if you talk about them in the terms you and I are discussing them, the criticism is that we're subjecting them to the standards of judgment of a subsequent age, or something along those lines, or that we're just trying to tear down what makes America great.
Right.
Where is the middle ground in that?
I believe, and we've talked about this before in different contexts, but I don't know that there is a middle ground. I think, I know in my own case, I choose to believe that the ideal continues to be worth pursuing. I think what I'm hearing from you is that it would have been great if it worked, but it didn't, so let's go in another direction, I think is what I hear you saying.
Or, at least let's be honest about, because we never have been, let's be honest about where we come from, where we're grounded. I think about that line in Genesis where it says that the blood of Abel cried out from the ground to Almighty God. And if that was a real physical thing that could happen, don't we realize that every particle of dirt on this entire continent would have started screaming in 1492, and the screaming would have reached the outer planets by now?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Because it's as though it seems to me that in the mythologizing and the whitewashing, and boy, it really is whitewashing.
Yeah.
That we make it less likely that we ever will deal with the underlying flaws. I understand why any reference to slavery got pulled out of the Declaration, because there were 23 people in the Continental Congress who no way would have voted for a document that had that in it.
No, exactly, and they knew that. And there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that a lot of people in the Congress realized that it was hypocritical what they were doing. But I think Franklin's the one that makes the case that to Adams, the most important thing is to get this thing passed, and whatever we have to do to make that happen, we've got to do it. And that's the issue that he makes to Jefferson as well.
And that's a political pragmatism that comes down to us this day.
Exactly. Sure as hell is.
I read an article the other day about how and I remember it, I'm sure you do too, during the debate over the Affordable Care Act, those of us on the progressive side of things were saying, no, really, there's got to be a public option in there. Some sort of Medicare for all, something, or else there's going to be trouble. And I think the progressives were proven correct.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
But by the same token, within the dynamics of, and let's be honest, it's not the dynamics of bipartisanship. It's the dynamics of the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party only. The only way to pass that bill was to make sure that there was nothing that could ever be transformed into universal single payer.
That's right.
With the exception of the Medicaid expansion, and John Roberts took care of that. And so there you had it. You had this understanding in 2009 that, look, we got to pass this, even if it's not what we want. And progressives, to the extent that they were in Congress, got on board and passed it. And now it's a little bit, well, I hesitate to say hypocritical, but it's at least ironic that you've got middle-of-the-road Democrats, conservative Democrats, and progressive Democrats all yelling at equal volume that the Affordable Care Act must not be dismantled.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in many ways, even though it is not the law of the land, the deep compromises that attended the passage or the I mean, how do we refer to the Declaration of Independence? The approval, the compromises that attended that were in that moment, especially in regard to slavery, baked into the American political process.
Right. And I think what you point out about the Native Americans, and it's interesting, what that means is that in the political process, Native Americans had no supporters. And so therefore Jefferson didn't have to pull all of that out because there was nothing in that idea that would cause people to walk out of the Congress and not vote for the document. But there was on slavery.
Right.
So
there was no constituency. Yeah. I think
right.
you could say that in the slave versus anti-slavery aspects of the Continental Congress, you might say that right there, that moment, and who's to say that maybe it might not have informed some of the thinking of people like Madison later. That moment is the moment when we see the fertilization of a two-party system in the American political womb.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, you see I mean, how much grief, how much misery would this country have been spared had they simply dealt with that issue right there and then?
Right. And that debate goes on quite a bit around the Civil War, and whether, in fact, the more compromises Congress was able to reach until they finally ran out of them in 1860. Maybe we would have been better off and the war would have been a lot less bloody and a lot shorter if we had confronted the issues early on rather than kicking the can down the road with compromise after compromise after compromise.
So let me ask you a question. Let's say in 1775, when this process really gets going in earnest, let's say that that the northern colonies looked at the southern colonies and vice versa and said, we are going to be forever divided on this issue of slavery. So what do you say? Y'all go your way and we'll go ours. What would have happened if instead of 13 United States, we wound up with 6 and 7 or 7 and 6?
6, right.
What would have happened if the basically the Atlantic coastal region of the North American continent had been balkanized?
That was the major fear behind the Federalist Papers. It's very interesting, Bob, that the very first Federalist Papers, the one that John Jay wrote, addressed just that issue, the importance of holding the entire 13 colonies together in one unit and the dangers of dividing it into regional state groups. The issue that they were talking about then was with 3 groups, not 2. They were talking about northern, southern, and middle.
Right.
And the argument was, it seemed logical to a lot of people, who, especially those who supported the Articles of Confederation, that that's really what we need to do, is look at the major issues that divide and address that division by separating them. And John Jay takes off right away the first several Federalist Papers talking about the fact that we're all one people, we're all from the same lineage, we're all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and argues vehemently against that. And so, what you've raised here, Bob, is an issue. It's gotten a little bit away from Jefferson, but I really think it's an important issue in its own right. And that's the whole idea of compromise, the whole idea of a moderate middle. And basically what you're saying is that those people that supported a moderate middle from the very beginning are the ones that made this nation what it is. And that very idea of constantly working toward a moderate middle through compromise in itself contradicts the values and the principles that these guys are writing about in their documents and in their papers.
Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you are. I don't think you are. I think that I think you're right. I think that,
and that was not me
when you
fishing.
talk about the difference between the northern states and the southern states over slavery, there's an inclination or a tendency, especially within the North, there's a tendency to assume that separation breaks down into good guys and bad guys. The reason that there was so much opposition to slavery in the North had nothing to do with respect for the slave as a person.
Nope.
It had everything to do with the political realities and the distribution of power in the nation. That's what it was about.
And the generation of wealth.
Yeah, that's really what it was about. And a lot of these northern people made fortunes from the institution of slavery in terms of the shipbuilding and the merchant interest and moving slaves and insurance and all of this other stuff. My God. Slavery was big business in the North as well as it was in the South. And so the reality is that it wasn't the benefit of the slave that ever was on the table. It was the political power, and you're right, the way wealth was distributed and redistributed in the nation. That was the real consideration. So that bothers a lot of people to confront that, but it's real.
Well, and you have to confront it in Lincoln too. Lincoln was not sitting around wringing his hands over the condition of the poor slaves. Now, to be fair, Seward was. Seward in the 1850s goes on a tour to visit friends in the South and gets into Virginia and turns around and comes home. Mm-hmm. Goes back to New York because he was so disgusted. He was so sickened. He was so heartbroken by the conditions of the enslaved peoples that he saw that he found it he and his wife, and arguably his wife was a bigger abolitionist than he, could not conceive of continuing and even participating, albeit tangentially, in that institution. Mm-hmm. Because, once they got into Virginia, it was, everything was, he was treated like any other white person.
Right.
By a class that was forced to be servile and subservient and uneducated and deliberately so. And so he turns around and goes home because it's intolerable to him. But Lincoln wasn't that way.
No. Bob, there's an issue here, and I think it's an important one, and you raise it. And I guess it's a question that I would ask you. And because what is emerging to me, and maybe it should have before, but those people that function like you do, very honestly, those people that function principally and from the perspective of principle, those people who really believe that there needs to be a consistency between what I believe and and the way I live. We talk about people living their faith and all of that. I'm not too sure that these people aren't destined to confront nothing but one obstruction, one barrier after the other. Because what you're pointing out is from the very beginning of the creation of this republic, the compromises that were made in order to put it in to make it real automatically meant that they were hostile. There was a hostility built in between the system itself and the principles that people have developed that they've tried to associate with the system that doesn't quite meet the expectations, if that makes sense. In other words, the compromise between North and South, which made it possible to approve the Declaration of Independence, it seems to me compromises the sincerity and the principles of independence itself. And so when we start to talk about and focus on language, about what were the principles that drove the movement for independence, we have to be aware that the people who did it didn't, from the very beginning, didn't live up in any way, or didn't intend to live up to the principles they used to sell the movement.
And that's the thing. It's the didn't intend part. Because I think we can attribute to them a certain level of intent based upon their own actions, not judging people 241 years ago by standards of today, but by their own actions.
Mm-hmm.
And we find, I mean, is there anyone except maybe George Will who can read "all men are created equal" in the Declaration of Independence and not just give off some sort of, at least a little bit of a heartbroken wry chuckle? They had to know that that was
that they didn't mean that.
That was just errant mendacity.
One of the most revealing episodes. It's not a specific episode, but it's a period. Building the movement for independence in Boston, the movement, the revolution that began there with Sam Adams and the rest of them, the movement to build up the viability of a movement that forces ultimately the king to send troops in to occupy Boston and place it under martial law. To read the interactions that we have available of the people who actually built that movement, the Sam Adamses and the rest of them, it's very obvious that these people are very practical, down-to-earth revolutionaries. They recognize the difference between being successful in what we're trying to do and the need to sell it to a vast number of people. And the only way we can sell it to them is to raise the level of principle to the point that they're able to commit to it because of what they believe this issue is about, this movement is about. But they know from the very beginning that's not what it's about.
And therein,
it's a sales job. It's spin.
It's marketing.
Yeah.
So, and therein lies therein lies the rub again, because as progressive people, and I include you as well as I, because we are. We at the same time look up and say, hey, it's the last election is a good case in point. We sometimes you have to just keep the wolf away from the door, whatever the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was one choice, in November. And a whole lot of this country, you know how I describe it. We had a national one question IQ test, and we failed spectacularly.
We flunked it, yeah.
But I also acknowledge that there's some hypocrisy in that.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot wield power, and at the risk, if there's some right winger out there listening to this, they're going, I knew he was a commie, because Lenin understood.
Mm-hmm.
Lenin said, if I want 5 seats at the table and I only get 2, I'm not walking away from the table. I'm taking the 2 that I get.
Right. And what you do is you begin to build an initiative to get more.
And yet we've got a significant portion of the progressive movement that says, nope, don't want the 2 seats, don't want 1 seat.
Right.
I don't want to be in the. I don't want to.
I'm not going to play.
I'm not going to be at the table with them. I'm leaving the room.
Right. I'm not going to play the damn game. That's right. That's right. The example that I was going to use, which is somewhat similar, is John Adams as defending the troops as their attorney, the troops and the British troops in the Boston Massacre, and getting them off. And afterwards, he has a confrontation with Sam, his cousin Sam. And John obviously is speaking from the perspective, I'm an attorney, and my first responsibility is to stick to the principles that my profession is about. He says to Sam, when Sam raises questions about all the opposition to Adams because he participated in getting these guys off, John says to Sam, he said, Sam, can't they understand I was just doing my job? And what Adams is saying is he somehow, in his mind, separated his role as an attorney from the realities of the political movement that were underway and that he was in the middle of. And he thought he could separate the two. And Sam comes back and responds to him in a beautiful line and said, John, I know that, but you have to do it so damn well. And what, in a sense, what Sam is saying is, I understand your principles and there's a place for them, but this isn't one of them. What he basically is saying to John is, given what we're trying to do here, you're defending those people, those troops, and getting them off was a setback for us. And it may have been consistent with your principles and your values as an attorney. But the fact of the matter is, as where it fits into a movement that we're trying to do to topple a regime here, it's a counter blow. It's an obstruction, and it shouldn't have happened. And so basically what he's doing is forcing John to confront the realities of politics with the realities of principle. And I think that's where you're coming from. We'll go all the way back to Jefferson. The principles that Jefferson is writing and talking about on paper are principles that he doesn't live up to, that nobody can live up to. And so the issue is, are the principles noble enough that they are worth pursuing, or have we reached the point where we say, well, we tried and it didn't work, so let's go another way? Because the fact of the matter is, have we really tried? The people that we look to lead us in the effort to try were never committed to those principles in the first place.
And that comes down through history to us, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
The civil rights no, let's not start with civil rights. Let's not start with African-American civil rights. Let's start, because it gets such short shrift, let's start with the women's suffrage movement.
Okay.
They were beaten, imprisoned, tortured, tormented. Right. Life was made hell for them.
That's right.
And by the time that they got the vote, what they wound up getting was the minimum amount of power that was necessary to be ceded to get them to sit down and shut up.
Right.
Because expanding freedom, Bill, was not the goal. Sit down and shut up was the goal.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies to the African-American civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. It is a cession of that minimum amount of power and access necessary to get the movement to go away. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so to work within that, to consider within that framework, I'd like to go back to the question I asked about, balkanized colonies, because one of the favorite games of people who dabble in history like myself is to ask, what would have happened if the proliferation of, for instance, of speculative novels about the South winning the Civil War,
right,
is a case in point, because there are oodles of those books. People,
right.
It's like sugar to ants. People march to it.
Yeah, there were many people who argued that slavery was going to die of its own, of its own volition, and that if the South had won the war, slavery would have disappeared anyway.
Yeah, I think that's crap.
I do too.
But the
reality is, slavery was an institution to control a people. That people believed there was no other way. That ultimately, well, you talk about it with women, get them to sit down and shut up. Slavery was a way to control African Americans or to control imported slaves, and for purposes of exploitation. And you can't exploit people and expect them to accept it. And they knew that.
And also, we must understand that it was power preservation, because as a result of the slave industry, and I think we must, it's not just an institution, it's a damned industry, okay? Mm-hmm. There's a reason that if you've got, we refer to a steel mill as a plant, and a plantation as a plantation. They both have the same root word.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, neither here nor there. But it enabled a significantly smaller population of white people to wield power commensurate with a larger number of white people in the North. And we can't evade that. But right. to get to my query, if query it is, and by God, we're running out of time, Bill.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Go ahead. I loved it.
Since we can't go back in time and just balkanize the Atlantic seaboard, the question becomes, here we are, now what do we do? Mm-hmm. Is there any way to address these manifest injustices, clear them off the books, wipe up the blood, calm the screaming of the earth, if you will,
mm-hmm.
and create, and work on, as the Constitution says, that that more perfect union. And it strikes me, and maybe some other day we'll pick this up, that even though it outrages white people, that the best way to do that is, in fact, reparations. Reparations that follow on the heels of a deep and searching, on the level of one of the 12 steps from Alcoholics Anonymous, that deep and searching appraisal they talk about,
mm-hmm.
in the form of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that might take 10 or 20 years to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, start trying to make it right.
Right. I hear
and
you.
Even if that opens a door of people saying, well, okay, I am of Japanese ancestry, and not even talking about what happened in the Second World War, or I'm of Chinese ancestry. What about what was done to us on the West Coast? Okay,
right.
Well, we'll address that too.
Right.
And the first people in line have got to be the Native Americans and the African American people.
Right.
And then and maybe out of that, and maybe it's just a puncher's chance, but as far as I can tell, it's the only chance.
Right. Right. When you were talking, I was thinking you were talking about women and you were talking about the civil rights movement. But I'll tell you, another area that's very interesting is the labor movement. And the philosophical differences between groups like the the American Federation of Labor, the craft unions on the one hand, and the what becomes a CIO, the organization of unskilled workers,
right,
and the unwillingness of craft unions and craft workers to be lumped together with the unskilled, and the efforts. Groups like the IWW, for example,
or the Knights of Labor,
and what they stood for and what they wanted to accomplish, and how people in the establishment realize, holy hell, compared to what these guys want, Gompers we can listen to. Let's give Gompers the opportunity to win a few. He'll win over enough support from the other group that will eliminate the real threat.
And yet, by the 19-teens, Governor Calvin Coolidge came down on Samuel Gompers like a ton of bricks over
mm-hmm.
the Boston police strike.
That's right. Boy, I remember that. I wasn't there, but I remember reading about that baby.
Yeah.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is the whole issue of compromise and the whole issue of moderation and But on the other hand, when you talk about balkanization of the colonies and initially, I mean, look at the political situation the nation is into today. Is there an alternative other than trying to win control at the expense of the people that currently have it, or trying to find common ground between the two groups? Is there a third alternative? I don't know.
Well, and for all intents and purposes, we are balkanized.
Yeah.
The only thing is, we'll save that for another day because it's 3
Right.
o'clock.
Bob, it's 3 o'clock.
Yeah,
thank
Bill,
you, my buddy.
I'm sorry for.
Listen, well, this is the sign-off, so thank you all very, very much. And, Bob, thank you. My God, it was a fabulous 45 minutes, I thought.
As long as you enjoyed it.
I did. I always do.
I don't want to hijack your program.
You're not hijacking anything. I loved it. And many of the things you said are things I couldn't say, but I value the fact that they were said, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. Everybody, goodbye, and have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back together the first of the week. This is Bill O'Brien thanking you and hoping you have a great weekend and a great evening. Thank you.